Hi friends, host Eric here, talking with famous people. I've just been thinking about how life's a lot like poker. And I want to explain how. First of all, most of the time, you should do nothing. Which is to say, persist in your current course of inertia without making changes. Without creating any impacts. In poker, that means folding your hand. In life, that means not beginning some sort of plan to do something very often. Because if you're going to begin to do something, the only way it makes sense to do it is to finish doing it, and for the impacts it creates to be impacts that you want. So you have to be very careful about what you choose to do, or else at best you're wasting your time. But at worst, and more likely, you're creating unanticipated impacts that you don't like, or that hurt other people that you don't care about, right? So most of the time in poker you should do nothing, because most of the time your hand's not good enough to play. Most of the time in life you should do nothing, because most of the time in life your hand's not good enough to play. Whatever action you're considering taking isn't just determinedly the best action enough to take to justify taking it. Similarly, in life, as in poker, you cannot evaluate the wisdom, correctness of a choice by looking to the outcomes. You can, just like life, determine the desirability of a choice by anticipating which outcomes are more likely. What this means in poker is, if you flop in no limit hold'em, 4 of a kind, but they're 4 twos, you should definitely go all in, or try to get as much of your money in, as many people to bet against you as possible. You should risk all of your money on that hand. Let's say the flop though comes out 2-2-7. Somebody else has got a pair of 7s, and then on the turn there's another 7. Now they have 4 7s and you have 4 2s. They've won the hand. You still made the right decision, and it's the decision you should make every time. And if you're influenced by the fact that one time you had 4 2s, you lost, so this time you have 4 2s, you're going to fold your hand, you're a terrible poker player. I'm a terrible poker player, but not for that reason. Most of the problems in life, from my perspective as an ENTP who's got extroverted sensing 8th, come from the fact that people do too much stuff when they should be folding their hands. And worst of all, they justify that a choice is wise by anticipating that it's desirable. So, to be a wise choice in life, unlike in poker, you have to have moral legitimacy. In poker, the only way you can lose moral legitimacy is by cheating. And that basically never happens because casinos are so carefully curated. In life, you have to evaluate whether a decision is morally legitimate before you can ask the question about whether it's desirable in its anticipated outcomes. Remember, we can only ever predict outcomes. We can't know for sure what the outcomes of a given course of action is. This is much more significant a concern when dealing with matters of public policy than matters of private business. So when you do a lot of stuff, like I do, get started on a lot of stuff and don't finish it and stuff, I'm wasting my time. And that's bad for me. I'm having a poor relationship with doing. But when the government makes public policy that then impacts everybody without taking adequate time to deliberate in full and anticipate the reality that there will be unanticipated and unintended consequences, to thoroughly evaluate whether the proposed course of legislative action is actually going to solve and what the mechanism of solvency will be, those questions are secondary to the question of whether it's morally legitimate. Because if Congress is trying to hand down a decision that a given piece of legislation is unconstitutional, it's trying to do the Supreme Court's job. It doesn't have jurisdictional legitimacy. If Congress is trying to pass a law that's unconstitutional, it does have legitimacy to do that because it's the court's job to tell them that law is not constitutional. Now, the individual Congress people, however, don't have legitimacy to do that because they all swore an oath to uphold the Constitution. So the thing is, the legislative body, Congress, is not constrained by the fact that the Constitution enumerates its powers. It's constrained by the fact that the Supreme Court is empowered to strike down legislation that exceeds the scope of those enumerated powers. And this is just like poker, right? I can bet all my money when I get my hand and it's 7-2, and everybody else on the table has got pair of aces, pair of kings, pair of queens, another pair of aces, another pair of kings, another pair of queens, and I can still win the hand and rake in a huge pot, right? Well, that's Congress, let's say, successfully passing unconstitutional legislation that the Supreme Court doesn't strike down, either because nobody withstanding challenges the law or because they make the wrong decision. You know, they're incorrect in their legal reasoning. That happens sometimes. You can blame Congress for being stupid, but you can't blame them for being illegitimate. You can only blame the Supreme Court for being illegitimate, for failing to do its job correctly. So, hopefully that clears up how the important question of why life is like poker.